Hey guys, on this video tutorial, I want to take a look at 5 examples in which we're going to work out some word problems that involve rate of change. And rate of change is just a fancy expression for slope. And hopefully most of you are very familiar with slope, but if you're not, we're going to do a quick little review. Here's the catch. On this video, I'm not going to do too much writing. I might not do any writing. I want you, though, to get out a piece of paper, maybe pause the video, and jot down a couple of things that I say on each example, because after this video, you're going to answer these questions specifically using some of the guidance and the hints that I give you along the way. So we're going to try this kind of a backwards approach. So let's get started. I am going to zoom in on the first example. And the first example is talking about a tether to the top of a pole, and it wants to know the slope. So let's review. Slope is rise over run. Another way of expressing rise over run is the change in y over the change in x. So what is the change in y here? The change in y is 9 and the change in x is 12. So you would write your fraction as 9 over 12. Preferably when it comes to slope, we do prefer to simplify that. So rather than writing it as 9/12, I ask that you reduce that fraction. Let's take a look at example number 2. I have an airplane and it's descending. I know it's descending because of the slope. The slope is negative, and it's going to land at the airport or that tower below. It wants us to calculate the vertical change, the change in y. So in this case, you're actually going to set up a proportion. So we're going to take our formula, slope equals change in y over change in x, and you're going to write negative 0.1 or negative 0.1 equals, and then you're going to do your vertical change. Your vertical change is unknown. You can call that any variable you want. If it's confusing to call it x, you could call it y, but put your variable on top and put the 50 on bottom. You're then going to solve for your variable using the skills that we talked about in class. And in this case, keep in mind you're looking for the height of the plane when you're done. The hint is your height cannot be negative. So remember that. Even if you get a negative answer, you gotta switch it to positive because we're talking about height. The negative comes into play because the plane is actually going down, not going up. And that can be a little confusing. Our next example, let's take a look at this. We've got Gail. Gail is climbing to the top of a cliff. Her time is changing. She starts at 10. She ends at 11. She goes from 0 meters in altitude all the way up to 33 meters in altitude. The question that is at play here is, what is her average height of ascent? What is she doing over time? So from 10 to 10:20, this one's kind of tricky, and I think you guys can handle it. It's going to be meters on top and hours on bottom. So the change from 10 to 10:20 in meters is 22 meters. So 22 meters goes on top. What goes on bottom is the time. And in this case, the amount of time that passed is only 20 minutes. So it's going to be 22 over 20. However, you've got to convert that time from minutes into hours. So if that's tricky, you might need to do a little research on that. My hint to you is that these 3 answers are going to be whole numbers. You cannot have 22 over 20 because that's minutes, or that's meters per minute. You need to switch meters per minute to meters per hour. So think about that. Example number 4. You might want to pause the video and look at this. You have a cross beam, and the cross beam is at a diagonal. It wants to know what the slope of the cross beam is. So, rise over run. This one's a little bit difficult. So let's take a look at what we do know. I know that I can figure out this slope because I have a rise and I have a run. I have a rise of 12 and I have a run of 4. So if my rise is 12 and my run is 4, that yellow slope is 3, or 3 over 1. But I don't want the yellow slope. I want, let's see here. I'm going to pick a different color. Let's change our highlighter to pink. No, let's change it to green. Okay. This is really what I want, is that slope. So here's your hint. The yellow slope and the green slope are perpendicular. And hopefully you remember from algebra and geometry, perpendicular slopes are the negative reciprocal of one another. So think about that when you're trying to calculate the slope of the green line. Negative reciprocal. Let's move on to number 5, the last question. We have Bridget reading books. On day 1, it looks like she read 20 books, and then on day 3, she's read a total of 80 books. These are cumulative totals, so they keep adding up. The first question is going to ask you, find the average number of pages Bridget read per day. So per day, you really only have to look at the first day because that's day 1. That's going to give you an average number of pages for each day. But if we flip that, and let's say we look at on which days did Bridget read more pages than her daily average, you'd have to go through and divide those up, because on day 2 she read, it looks like, a total of 50 pages. So 50 pages on day 2, 20 pages on day 1. So you can divide those up into days to figure out, on average, which one is greater. And then on the last one, if Bridget had been able to keep up the pace she had on day 3, how many days would it have taken her to reach 140? That one I'm going to leave you hanging on because that one's a little tricky. Look at her pace on day 3 and estimate how many days it's going to take her at that pace. If she got to 80 pages on day 3, how many days is it roughly going to take her to get to, what was it? A total of 140 pages. So you can be a little creative on that and make your best guess. As you progress and you go to the questions themselves, you will have multiple chances. I think I've given you a couple chances on this to perfect your score. Reach out to me if you have any questions or concerns, and join me on our next Teams call. I hope you guys have a good one, and take care.